Okay, let's go ahead and get started, everyone. Welcome to the very first Birds and Bees Festival presentation. We're super excited to have Katie from the Xerces Society talking to us about the Missouri Bumble Bee Atlas. And with no further ado, please go ahead, Katie.
All right, short and sweet. Thanks everyone for being here. My name is Katie Lamke, and I'm a conservation biologist with the Xerces Society. My main role is to coordinate the Nebraska Bumble Bee Atlas and the Missouri Bumble Bee Atlas, which is what we're gonna talk about today for a few short minutes. So the Xerces Society, a lot of people kind of get hung up on the name there. You know, it starts with an X, a little bit intimidating, but we're actually named after the first butterfly that's known to have gone extinct from human causes. So it's named after the Xerces blue butterfly. And we work to conserve invertebrates as well as the habitat that supports them. So we've got people on the ground directly putting in habitat or working with farmers, land managers to support pollinators. We've got people working on advocacy, creating better policy to support pollinators. We're helping with research in mussels, butterflies, fireflies, and of course, education. We put out a lot of books and guidelines, recommendations, and hold workshops to help improve people's awareness on what we can all do to support pollinators and invertebrates at large. And the great thing about Xerces is that it is donor funded. So there are many, many volunteers that help with projects, but there's also, I think we have over 12,000 members now that help support us and keep allowing us to do the work that we are doing. So if you would like to become a Xerces member, you can log on to xerces.org/donate. And now we're going to move into the Atlas. You may have heard about it in the last couple of weeks. I know there's been a lot of media going around because we've got our workshop coming up next week. But the Atlas launched last August, and it's a collaborative effort to track and conserve Missouri's native bumblebees. So it's a partnership between Pheasants and Quail Forever, as well as Mizzou's College of Agriculture, Food, and Natural Resources, and the Missouri Department of Conservation. So we've got a lot of partners in on this project, working to engage the community in pollinator conservation. And we're choosing to focus on bumblebees for a few different reasons. One of those is that they are a rather charismatic species, right? A lot of us can recognize a bumblebee. They're large, they're fuzzy, they have this really loud audible noise to them. It doesn't take much thought for us to be like, oh, that's a bumblebee. The next thing is that they're a generalist species. So bumblebees are going to be found foraging on all different kinds of plants, and they're going to be in all different types of habitats. Whereas some of our other wild bees, you know, they might only be out on the landscape for 2 to 4 weeks, or maybe they only forage on a very specific plant, or maybe they're only found in wetlands. So bumblebees create a lot of opportunities for us to see them because they're found in so many different places. And the next part that's kind of tied to that generalist aspect is that they have a long active season. So bumblebees are going to be active in Missouri from April, right about now is when we're starting to see a lot of queens out, all the way through October, November. It depends on, you know, how that year is temperature-wise, how many flowers are still blooming. So we have a lot of chances to see bumblebees throughout the summer. And lastly, they are an imperiled group. So bumblebees actually have a lot of supporting evidence showing that about 25% of the different species in North America are in decline. So we know that they need our help, and the way that the Atlas works is to bring in a community science aspect to it. So by getting people involved all across the state and out looking for bumblebees and doing short habitat assessments, this gathers a large amount of data in a small amount of time, which helps us to monitor population changes. So we can look at what we're seeing right now versus what we saw 20 years ago or 40 years ago, and see how those populations are doing and sort of make predictions for where they might go in the future. And we can do that same thing for looking at the distribution of species. You know, are species that were found statewide 40 years ago, are they still found statewide today? Or are they shifting northwards? Are some of them moving west? You know, just see what the populations are doing right now. And next we can fill in those habitat gaps. So as people go out and look for bumblebees, we also ask them to do a really short habitat assessment, just to sort of record what kind of area you're surveying and how many plants are there, what kind of plants are there nesting resources. so that we can kind of key in on those features that bumblebees are picking up on. And having all of this information really allows us to refine our conservation efforts and form these evidence-based recommendations so that we truly can be efficient in the ways that we're supporting bumblebees in Missouri. So the way the project works is it's split up into 75 different grid cells. And the idea is that as a volunteer signs up to participate, they adopt a grid cell, and the grid cell can be anywhere that they want. It can be in your hometown, it can be somewhere where you might vacation. And then you go out and survey that grid cell anytime between June and September. It's up to you. And after you survey, you submit that data back to us, and we analyze it and improve conservation efforts. So here is a map of the current grid adoption. All the green grid cells that you see are wide open. There are no volunteers in those cells. The yellow grid cells have been adopted by at least one person, and the gray grid cells are closed. So that means there's at least 5 people already surveying in that grid cell. So you can sign up for anyone that is green or yellow and go conduct bumblebee surveys. And after you adopt the grid cell and figure out where you're going to go, that's when you attend a training, which is what we have coming up next week. I'll put information up at the end of this short talk. If you don't want to attend another Zoom session, I know they've been kind of guttering up a lot of our life recently. We have all of our resources available online, so you can read through them in a PDF fashion. You can watch recordings of our trainings from last year. We have all of our tools on there. So we have a bumblebee identification guide. We have a list of supplies of what kind of nets or cameras or vials you might need. Everything that you need is on our website. And after you get familiar with the protocol is when you get to do the fun part of actually going out into the field and surveying for bumblebees, photographing them. And the great thing about the Atlas is that it's all catch and release. So no bumblebees are harmed during the surveys. And the way that we get around this is when you catch a bumblebee, whether you're doing it in a net or maybe you've got the skill to go catch one right in a vial off of a flower, you put that vial into like an ice chest with some crushed ice in there. And this chills the bee down and makes it immobile, sort of, it enters like a hibernation mode for a few minutes. And then this allows us to take really high quality photographs of the bumblebee. And then those pictures are submitted to Bumblebee Watch, which is the platform that we use that collects all kinds of observations of bumblebees from North America. And this platform was launched in 2014, and since then has gained almost 80,000 different observations from 30,000 different people. And this database feeds into Bumblebees of North America, which is the largest database holding all the information that we know about bumblebees in North America. So there's records going back to the 1800s, all the way up to people submitting queens today. So the data that is collected here is used to produce guidebooks, like Bumblebees of North America, the book that most people in this field use, is where this data is feeding into. And the really cool thing that really highlights the power of community science here is that in the last decade, 25% of all the records in that large database have come from Bumblebee Watch. So that's a quarter of what we know about bumblebees today has come from largely community science. And there's also a mobile app for this app. So those of you that are familiar with iNaturalist, Bumblebee Watch works pretty much the same way. You take photos right from your phone, you submit it with an observation, and it uploads right to the app. And here I've taken some Bumblebee Watch data just from the Nebraska Bumblebee Atlas and the Missouri Bumblebee Atlas. And you can see that through time, as more and more people are engaged in their states, we're really filling in those gaps. The states become defined. You can see the outline of them once people are aware and know what they can do to start helping pollinators. So in 2019, when the Nebraska Bumblebee Atlas launched, we added almost 700 bumblebee observations. And then in 2020, when Missouri launched, and we had Nebraska going, there were 2,700 observations that were added. So this year, the survey season starts in June, and we're really excited to see what happens with 2 full seasons for both projects. And the great thing is that the people that are participating in these projects really are valuing their experience, right? They're learning a lot about bumblebees, they're having a good time doing it. And most of them plan to participate again for multiple summers, so it's not just a one and done thing, but it really gives you an action step to take in pollinator conservation, is going out to these natural areas and surveying for bumblebees to help us protect them. And we do have Instagrams where we like to keep up with people's stories, so you can see what they're out doing when they're surveying, or maybe they found a cool species, or they got to explore a new part of the state, sharing some fun facts. So it's really great to keep up with everyone that's out doing bumblebee surveys. So if you would like to get involved, we have our training coming up next week on Tuesday, May 11th and Thursday, May 13th. This is a two-part training. So the first day, we're going to look at bumblebee threats, what's leading to their decline, go over conservation, talk about their life cycle. And then the 13th is when we're going to dive into identification of the species that you might find in Missouri and look at the nitty-gritty protocol of how to conduct a survey, how to fill out those data sheets, how to photograph bumblebees, how to handle a bumblebee right in front of you. So if you want to sign up for that, if you visit mobumblebeeatlas.org, there's a link that you can sign up for. And with that, I will take any questions.
Thanks so much, Katie. I'm going to go ahead and put that mobumblebeeatlas.org in the chat as well. Okay. We have a question from Marcia. How do bumblebees manage tiny native flowers?
How do they manage tiny native flowers? So bumblebees, they're going to have a preference for what they're foraging on, right? And usually for bees, it comes down to color. They like the blues and the yellows, but it's also going to come down to the amount of floral resource that they can get from it. So is there a good quality nectar there? Is there a good quality pollen that they're after? So if the flower has something that the bumblebee wants, it will find a way to pollinate it. But there are also smaller wild bees that might be more efficient at pollinating a smaller flower.
Folks, I know there's 30 or so people on here. Don't be shy. Feel free to put a question in the chat or the Q&A in Whova, and we'll make sure that Katie gets to it. That was a really comprehensive presentation in a short amount of time, though, Katie.
Short and sweet. Yeah, and I think Scott's giving the keynote on Saturday night. Scott Black, he's the director of Xerces Society.
He is on tomorrow night, Friday.
Tomorrow night, okay.
Yep.
Yeah, so that'll be a nice one to tune into too. He's going to go over insects and the decline and everything that we can do to help.
Having seen his presentation, I know it won't be exactly the same one, but I've seen his presentation on insect declines, and he really does end on a positive note and talk about a lot of what we can do. And so, and such as community science and contributing to surveys like this one.
Yeah, and it's so important too to end on those positive notes, because when you think about conservation and the decline of anything, insects, birds, it's heavy. So knowing what little steps we can take is useful for people.
That have been shown to be effective in many, many, many cases. Katie, I have a question here from Teresa. What equipment is needed to complete the surveys?
Yes, so you're going to need a camera. We usually recommend a digital camera that has a macro setting, but plenty of people just use their cell phone. You need a net, preferably. If you don't want to use a net, you can try and capture them using a vial. People use any glass or plastic vials that you have at home that you can repurpose. And then the data sheets you print offline. Other than that, you just need to be familiar with where you're going to sample, so you know, like, oh, there's a good patch of flowers in this area, let's go check it out. And of course, there's a lot more detail on what you need on our website. There's a whole supplies list.
We actually have a couple more questions. People are getting a little less shy. Arlene asks, is there a grid map that shows cities or highways so we know what actual locations are available to help in?
Yeah, so if you zoom in on that map, the grid cells are transparent so you can see where you are in the state. You can also search directly on the map if you have a specific address you're looking for, and it will zoom in to the grid cell.
Very nice. We have a question that came in on the Whova chat as well, which is basically, is it all right to do the online training of bee sampling methodology and identification if you are not in the position to volunteer with the Missouri surveys?
Yes, I mean, we're hoping that the majority of people that attend these are going to sign up and participate in the Atlas, but certainly if you're not able to participate in the surveys, you're welcome to attend. And through that Bumblebee Watch app that I mentioned, you can submit observations anytime. They don't have to be tied to a survey. So if you see one while you're out walking your dog or one in your backyard, you can just take a picture and upload that.
Katie, would that be true? Can folks in other states use that app as well?
Yes, anyone in the United States and Canada can use that app. Yeah. Yeah, and we have Bumblebee Atlas projects going on in Nebraska, Missouri, Oregon, Idaho, Washington, California, and hopefully a few more coming in the future.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Someone from Western Canada says, great, I've been working on British Columbia bumblebee identification. So
Yep, the app
from
is there.
Katie in BC. Great. Marsha asks, is there one bee that is the most common?
The common eastern bumblebee is pretty common in Missouri, and the brown-belted bumblebee. Those are both very common and abundant throughout their entire range. The brown-belted bumblebee is the one that's on the screen here. Not that it means very much to people, but there it is.
Okay. Any other questions, folks? I do want to note that this, as all the other sessions, is being recorded, so you can review it later. Or, of course, go online and see any of the resources that Katie has mentioned. We've got a lot of thanks to you for a great talk in the Whova chat. So
good.
Oh, quick question here, Kathy. What are good plants to attract bumblebees?
There are a lot of different plants, especially, I think the most important thing, instead of talking about specific plants, I would like to say that you should plant plants that are going to bloom in spring, summer, and fall to supply food resources for them throughout all of those growing seasons. If you go onto Missouri Prairie Foundation has a list for pollinator plants. Xerces Society also has a list for pollinator plants specific to the Midwest. So there are 2 resources there if you want to look at specific plants for your area.
I find bumblebees near my front porch. Could they be nesting in the ground near our foundation or under our concrete porch?
They could be nesting under the porch. That's a good location for bumblebees. The other thing that might be is a carpenter bee. Carpenter bees are also a large bee. They also like to drill into wood. So if you see like 1/2-inch size holes in your wood somewhere, it could be a carpenter bee. Either way, if you have them nesting around your house, it means you're providing some sort of quality habitat for pollinators.
Karen says, thank you. I'm happy we have them. Sarah has put in the Whova chat a nice link to the Xerces pollinator plants for the Midwest region.
Wonderful.
And Grow Native as well. So the Missouri Prairie Foundation's Grow Native program, Native Plants for Pollinators, that link is also in the chat, and it will stay in the chat so folks can reference it later. Diane says many reasons to admire and not fear bees. Definitely.
Indeed.
And finally, Katie, it looks like we have one more question as well. Have you noticed any changes in timing of emergence of bees? We have noticed early emergence of the inverts I am looking at in BC. So this is from Katie in British Columbia.
Yeah, that's definitely something that's on our radars everywhere, especially with changing climates. And is phenological mismatch going to be happening? Are the plants going to bloom before the bees come out, or vice versa? And I think it's hard to say, right now, because there can be fluctuations in invertebrate populations year to year, and that can be dependent on drought levels and soil temperatures. And so this year, I know, at least in Nebraska, we had sort of a really hot weekend that came out pretty early, and then we had another freeze. So that also could have affected what we're seeing this year. But it's hard to say, because they can fluctuate from year to year, and there's a whole lot going on the larger scale.
We have a carpenter bee question, and I know someone else that would probably second this question if he could. Living in a log house, carpenter bees can be a problem. Can we encourage them to go elsewhere in a natural way?
There are some creative solutions. I've heard of people putting out like 2x4s sort of on a back fence or something to encourage them to go nest out there. The other thing that I would maybe think about doing is, after those bees emerge, just covering up those holes, and hopefully they won't re-nest in there. But yeah, carpenter bees can be tricky ones once they find out that your house is a good place for them to live as well.
Agreed. Okay. Katie says, great, thank you to you, Katie. Bees are beauties.
Bees are beauties, Katie.
Well, wonderful. I'm glad we ended up getting a bunch of questions in, Katie, so that you could tell folks a little bit more.
Yeah.
I think that's all our questions, checking in both locations. So I want to thank you very much. I found that super informative, and I'm sure others did as well. And thanks to everyone who attended.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Have a great day, everybody. Thanks again, Katie. I really appreciate it.